Georgia might not lose a game this season. I mean, seriously. For any other team, that sounds like a crazy stretch or exaggeration, but that is not the case for the Bulldogs. Georgia is just unstoppable, and they've literally lost 2 games since 2021 and have won 2 natties over the span. They are the team to beat again, and they've 100% proven that they are. And the Dogs are already off to a hot start after crushing Clemson at Mercedes-Benz Stadium 34-3 to kick off the year. Clemson just simply couldn't move the ball at all, and we were all reminded of just how dominant Georgia has been over recent seasons. There was a long time there where Kirby Smart was 100% stuck in the shadow of Nick Saban, but those days are over, and they have been over. Georgia lost that 2017 natty in overtime on that crazy Tua Tagovailoa to Devontae Smith walk-off play, but Georgia did eventually get their revenge. They beat Bama to win the natty in 2021, with the Crimson Tide fresh off a title win the year before, and then Georgia beat the absolute brakes off of TCU to go back-to-back. Last year, Georgia was great again, and they were set to be the clear favorite to win the natty, but then came the SEC championship. Alabama somehow found a way to win, and Georgia not only lost its undefeated season, but they ended up not even making the college football playoff, which is just crazy. It was just an insanely tough year to get in, with even an undefeated Florida State team getting left out too. I do think it's definitely a good thing that it's an expanded format now, and now that it is, Georgia is the favorite again. And how could they not be? The roster is stacked. But when you look at past great Georgia teams that went on to win the national championship under Kirby Smart, the quarterback position wasn't exactly dominant. Both Jake Fromm and Stetson Bennett weren't exactly physical specimens. Fromm went in the 5th round and he's bounced around, and now he's on the Lions practice squad, and Stetson is on the Rams after he was a 2023 4th round pick. Both Fromm and Stetson really did benefit from the system around them at Georgia, but still never appeared to be top quarterback prospects. But now it feels like the tide is changing in Georgia, with a legit option to be the 1st overall pick in Carson Beck. It's safe to say that Beck has had to wait his turn at Georgia, but after a redshirt during COVID and 2 years as the backup, he finally got his chance and he looked great. Somehow, by Georgia standards, it was a down year because it lost a game, but they were 1 game away from the college football playoff, and who knows, maybe they would have three-peat. Carson Beck looked great, and he ended up being 2nd team All-SEC. He had 3,900 yards, 24 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, and he also rushed for 4 touchdowns too. It was a very promising season, and that obviously led to some super high expectations for this season. And he's already off to a good start with 278 yards and 2 touchdowns against Clemson. Beck is obviously the big name, and of course, he's going to get overdrafted because quarterbacks always do, so expect him to be a top pick. But Georgia has a bunch of dudes, as you'd expect. Malachi Starks is a top safety in the country. He literally started as a true freshman, which, by the way, at Georgia is no joke. And then he was a consensus All-American last year. Now, as I said, Beck will get overdrafted because quarterbacks always do, but you could probably say the same for Mykel Williams as an edge rusher. His reach is just insane, and his pure talent makes him an intriguing NFL prospect. Now, those are really the 3 big guys that I'd say to watch for the 2025 NFL draft, but again, it's Georgia, and they're gonna have a ton of dudes that get drafted. On the offensive line, Tate Rutledge and tackle Ernest Green III are good prospects, and same goes for tight end Oscar Delp and running back Trevor Etienne. There are some serious dudes on the offensive side of the ball, but of course, Georgia has been much more known for its defense. Starks and Williams are the big-time names to watch on the defense, but they're not the only dogs on the team. Defensive end Nazir Stackhouse and linebackers Jalen Walker and Smile Munden Jr. are also some notable guys to watch. This is just what you'd expect from Georgia at this point. Kirby Smart has really built a well-oiled machine, and the Dogs just keep on winning, and they did just that against Clemson. Clemson versus Georgia was a pretty big, cool matchup to start the year. Georgia is number 1, as we've all grown accustomed to, and then there's Clemson at 14. Now, there's definitely a big gap in between the two, and you could definitely tell in this game. Georgia is clearly the better team, and they looked like it, but it took a minute. Jackson really thought that Georgia was just going to come into this game and absolutely curb stomp Clemson, and sure, I mean, that did end up happening, but not at first, like at all. Clemson actually kept it tied through the first quarter, which probably surprised a lot of people, myself included. Then in the second quarter, Georgia drilled 2 field goals, but they still couldn't punch it in. Clemson was seriously fighting, and it looked like they might even have a chance to legitimately win the game. And then that hope went away. Georgia started the second half on fire, and Carson Beck hit Miami transfer Colby Young for a touchdown to finally get the Dogs in the end zone. Clemson hit a field goal, but then freshman Nick Frazier rushed for a touchdown for Georgia. Frazier actually ended up playing really well. He had 83 yards and a touchdown. He was a 4-star running back, but he got a bunch of playing time in week 1 because Trevor Etienne was suspended after that DUI. And man, do Georgia football players have trouble with traffic laws, or really just laws in general. The game felt like it was very over by that point, but Georgia wasn't done. Beck went on to throw another touchdown, this time to Vanderbilt transfer London Humphreys, and then junior running back Cash Jones punched one in too. Georgia just absolutely destroyed them, and it was a heck of a win for the Dogs. They had 447 total yards to Clemson's 188. It wasn't close. It was just dominant, and anyone who was dumb enough to have any worries or concerns about Georgia can probably go ahead and relax a little bit. But that's not exactly the case for Clemson, unfortunately. Now, while Georgia has built up this absolute machine over the past half-decade and is now the true powerhouse of college football, especially with Nick Saban now retiring, it really feels like Clemson has slipped a lot. Like, a ton. COVID feels like it was forever ago now, right? Well, the last time Clemson played in a national championship game was before COVID. If you remember, they won in 2018 against Alabama and then ended up losing to LSU the next season with that Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase team. So yeah, it's been a while for Dabo Swinney. Add in the way that NIL and the transfer portal have completely changed college football, and there are some serious reasons to not believe in Clemson anymore. Now, funny enough, in complete contrast to Georgia, when you look back at those really good Clemson teams that went on to make championships, quarterback was a huge strength. There's a reason Deshaun Watson was such a high pick, and then of course, you have Trevor Lawrence, who went on to be a first overall pick. Clemson was absolutely set at quarterback, and since then, it's been questionable. Remember that DJ, you know the name I'm talking about, and I'm not going to try to screw up his name, was supposed to be the heir to Trevor Lawrence, but he just didn't end up playing to that Clemson standard. And now Clemson's guy is Cade Klubnik. He started last year for the Tigers and went 9-4, passing for 2,800 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and rushing for 4 touchdowns. It was a promising season, but he'll have to do more this year, especially if Clemson is trying to make its eventual return to the college football playoff, which is going to be a lot easier now that it's 12 teams and not just 4. Klubnik could technically leave for the draft after this year, but honestly, that'd be quite the decision unless he absolutely balls out the rest of the season, because he didn't in week 1. He ended up with just 142 yards and a pick. It really wasn't great, and it's hard for really anyone to match up with Georgia, but I'll give you 2 names to watch that might be day 2 guys at the 2025 draft, starting with Barrett Carter at linebacker. He's a senior now, and he had 3.5 sacks last year and 5.5 sacks in 2022. Then there's offensive tackle Blake Miller. Now, he's not exactly a flashy guy to mention, I know, but he's a good lineman that's only a junior. It goes without saying that Clemson just isn't as good at Georgia, but honestly, who is? Probably no one. Georgia has been unstoppable for years, and it feels like that's just going to continue this season, especially with no Alabama there with Nick Saban. But I guess it is a bit too early to be counting out Kalen DeBoer. Regardless, everyone knows that not only is the SEC Georgia's to lose, but probably the national championship. The Dogs are just that good, again. And as for Clemson, well, it's time to figure it out.